Oh, geez, did I take this with me? Discrimination. It's on the top of the second page. Damien is going to join us at 12:30. Should we wait and discuss this with Damien at 12:30?
That's a great idea. So we're previewing this for 12:30 to make sure we know exactly where this language would go. And then by 1, we should try to tell Tom. So yeah,
Okay.
Let's do housing.
Okay. Do you mind pivoting to housing now, guys?
No, not at all.
Great. So you've got a little bit of a notion of what we're up against in our challenge in getting it through the House. So let's welcome back everybody to Senate Economic Development. We're here trying to get caught up. The House is about to take up S-100. There are 6 amendments, and representing some of those changes that have already occurred is David Hall, the David Hall sections, which are, I think, in front of us now. Oh dear, we now have a new section by side. Okay, David, if you'd be kind enough to remind us what your sections are and where to turn to in this.
Sure. So, David Hall, Legislative Council, you've got a version 10 of this chart, and the stuff that I've added to it is the blue stuff.
Is this version 10? Is that what we're looking at?
Should be the bottom right.
Yes, it says version 10, V10. Okay.
You all got it. Wonderful. So I'm here to talk about the stuff that's not zoning and land use and regulation, but rather the programmatic and funding pieces. So basically, in a nutshell, House General did its work. It added back, in its original committee report, it only looked at basically my sections, some of Damien's stuff, so around section 30 to the end. They voted out a committee report that included the programs and largely the funding that this committee supported. They doubled the home buyer grant program from 1 to 2 million, and they doubled the VHCB spending from 25 to 50. That's coming out of House General. That went to House Appropriation.
Are you talking about the home buyer one? You mean the missing middle?
No, I'm referring specifically to the first generation.
Oh, first generation home buyer. Yeah. Okay, great.
1 to 2 million.
Yep.
So that bill left House General, it went to House Environment and Energy. They only worked on Ellen stuff, which is not what I'm concerned about right now. And then the whole bill went to appropriations, House Appropriations. In House Appropriations, 2 things happened. They stripped out all of the money, and they agreed to add in 3 new pieces, actually 4 new pieces. One's a substitute and 3 are new, to the end of the bill. So if we start on page, this doesn't have page numbers.
Just feedback. This blue is very dark. Is there any way in future you can, I know because you like blue, you're making it a little lighter so we can read it.
I can try. I just wanted to not mess with Ellen's.
Yeah, I got it.
Yellow
I understand.
highlighting.
Okay, so they removed all this.
You don't really even need to read the blue. What the blue says in every case.
Yep, strike.
They're taking the money out.
Yeah.
So they did that with the Housing Navigator in 15A. They did it in 24 with the Rural Recovery Coordination Council. They did it in 27 with the Human Rights Commission litigator position. In my pieces, starting in 30. So the pattern in House Appropriations actually was consistent. Was they wanted to leave all the policy language but not have the money. And so I've changed it in most of those cases, either to some contingency that says the duty to implement the section is contingent on funding, or a statement of intent. The GA intends to appropriate money for this purpose in this year, but it doesn't actually do it. So 30 is
was the eviction rescue program.
It was, and I want to note that. So they removed this in its entirety because they had added later in the bill a new section 45 that puts more flesh on that. So, so the Vermont State Housing Authority will have a rent arrears assistance fund to administer. It's the same amount of money that House General proposed. It's just more programmatic language, basically.
And only applies so VSHA would administer it, but it wouldn't apply only to their properties.
No, it wouldn't.
Okay,
So, so section 31, this was your home sharing, and they liked it, but they took the money out to negotiate on the dollars. Section 32, I want to note they replaced your study language with the H213 study language on mobile homes and mobile home park infrastructure. And then the subsection H that did have 500,000 for mobile home and mobile home park investments.
they took that
They
out.
removed the money, obviously.
But they kept the language,
They kept the
the
study
program,
language.
okay.
So on 33, note here, the first generation home buyer, you guys had expanded the eligibility to allow for instance, if you lost a home during, or excuse me, someone in your family lost a home due to foreclosure, you guys said you could still count. So they kept that language, that lives on in section 33. It's the dollars that disappear in 34. And again, House General had suggested doubling that from your 1 million to 2 million GF. House appropriations took all the money out.
So this is all being negotiated in the budget as we speak, maybe.
That is above my pay grade.
Yes, the answer is yes.
I do not know, but it sounds like
Unless
yes.
they just
Although
said
I think-
nope, and did we put money into this?
Yes.
Yes.
We put in $1 million.
Okay, so then it is being negotiated.
It's all being negotiated, and I actually think a lot of it's staying, which is good, from the little bit I've understood. So I think we're gonna be in good shape.
So on the two VHFA programs, in the middle income housing and the rental housing revolving program, I want to note, not only did they take the money out, but they also did not codify those programs. They're just session law. And they say, again, VHFA's duty to implement these programs is contingent upon you providing adequate funding for that purpose. So the VHFA doesn't have to take on that liability without the dollars. For VHIP in 40 and 41, they kept the program changes, which you and both House General supported, took the money out. 42 was just, you all had recommended 25 million for VHCB. House General actually recommended 50. HAC took all of that money out. So the new pieces are 43 through 46. So the first one is this rental housing stabilization services program administered by CVOEO. And that would have been $400,000. They took the money out, and now the duty to implement that is again contingent
Yeah.
on there being funding. But it would be a statewide program, even though it's CVOEO, they are.
Right, they
They
do a
say
lot of
they
stuff.
testified they're capable of doing this on a statewide basis. And it's to provide all kinds of supports to stabilize rental housing, hooking people up with available dollars, with funding if it'll preserve a tenancy, other services, basically to keep people from being evicted from the housing that they do have.
Yeah, which is actually all these efforts, I think, in large measure. That's certainly true for 45, which is a revisioning of our eviction rescue program.
Yes.
So if we can prevent people from becoming unhoused, it makes a lot more sense than having to deal with them after they've been evicted and or are now homeless.
Just a question on the 43,
Yes.
could it, does it include supports
Yes.
at the rental location?
Yes.
Like supportive services, not just money?
Yeah, it's
Yes.
statewide
not just-
support.
yes.
Okay,
It's statewide support
Okay.
services. They do
Like
statewide
SASH,
mobile
stuff.
home park,
Okay.
CVOEO does statewide mobile home park advice and, work. Randy, sorry, you said something.
No, I didn't.
Oh, sorry. And what's the tenant representation pilot model
Yep.
program?
So that is gonna be
Very odd.
operated by legal aid, and it is in the counties of Lamoille and Windsor.
Oh,
And the
that,
original concept was
Now I
provide
understand the
representation.
emails.
yes, the emails
I know.
are becoming
Like
clear.
just Lamoille and Windsor.
So it's a pilot program.
Okay.
Got it.
Yeah, they designed it to be narrow in scope to basically see what impact it has. And those are the two counties that have been pilots for previous ARPA dollar funding for diversion and assistance. And they're basically anybody who's eligible and wants to receive representation in an eviction action can get it from either legal aid or if they're conflicted out from someone else through the program. And basically they're, you know, there's this large disparity between landlords generally who are represented and tenants who are not, and they're trying to see would it make any difference early in the process to be able to have full representation to negotiate settlements or resolution of conflicts before you have to go through the whole ejecting process. It's a 2-year pilot, and again, they had recommended, the ask and the recommendation was $1,077,000. The Appropriations Committee did not include the funding as with everything else, but said they'll keep the program language and make that program contingent upon an appropriation being made in the budget. The third piece, as you already saw, is a VSHA Rent Arrears Assistance Fund, try to prevent evictions for eligible tenants. It's supposed to be relatively quick. It's a 10-day turnaround, and then there can be an appeal, but that's also only 10 days. And basically, you would apply to VSHA. They would determine whether you're eligible. They would make this decision. They would provide arrears to try to prevent termination of the tenancy.
So do they also provide the services to actually fulfill the arrears? I mean, let's say it was the hole in the wall from a domestic violence incident. Do they also then help mitigate that, or do they just then give them money? I mean, because people may not have the
This one, the funds are
wherewithal.
only the amount necessary to cure rental arrears and if necessary
Okay.
costs, fees, first come, first served basis.
Yeah. Okay.
There are gonna be guidelines and standards that are conditions for the disbursement of funds, so that includes things like habitability, direct deposit, documentation, dismissals, notification. I mean, it's supposed to be just more meat on the bones of what Section 30 was intending to accomplish.
Okay.
It's really 43, that's the ancillary services. that are
Right.
supposed to come through.
I'm just thinking of at what point do we get pushback from the folks who are paying their rent? Is there a limit on how many times you can get arrearages covered?
My guess is,
I mean, I can hear the emails. I live in the apartment building. She has a party every Saturday night and doesn't pay her rent. I'm living on macaroni and cheese in a box too, so I can pay my rent, and you people keep paying her rent for her,
so
which is the kind of pushback that ends these programs.
my guess is that the program needs to be set up and they need to
Yes.
probably create it. They're designing it. So my guess is we'll have a chance to look at it. And David, what does it say in the language? Because obviously,
I'm speed reading through it. There have been
Okay.
so many versions of these two
now
things.
I know that.
I know at one point it was, you can only evaluate yourself of this once per year, but I'm looking back through to see if it's in this particular draft. I know that's the intention, is to not
Okay.
allow serial users.
Okay.
So whether that's through guidelines or it's in the
Is there
language.
anything that just deals with inquiry as to the reason for the need for your,
I'm sorry?
is there any in there that requires somebody to look at why the request is being made?
Yes.
I assume so, but I don't know.
Been around long enough, so I know what you can do that, right?
The first is sustainability of the tenancy. I mean, I don't know about the basis of need. I mean, you're behind on rent and at risk of eviction. Eligibility is capped at 100% of AMI. It has to be sustainable, so the assistance has to mean that you're actually gonna get to stay in your housing. As I said, funds are for arrearage and for costs and fees. Available until exhausted.
Okay, so they've got limited funds, so they're going, the sustainability of the tenant says, this was a one-time event. You know, the car broke down, I couldn't get to work, I had to fix the car, and I didn't have the rent money. That kind of thing, as opposed to, I just really poorly managed my money.
Right.
And I know Capstone now, but when I was on the board many, many years ago, they had an anti-eviction program, and a good portion of it is budgetary, you know.
And they have a whole program helping
Yes.
people budget better.
Oh, that's
Budget
really good.
better and financial, so you can figure out, maybe if you didn't buy this, you would have the rest of your rent money, or get you hooked up with, you know, something else. So it's a viable tenancy, meaning these are people that have a history of never paying their rent, walking out on 3 landlords.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
And
I can say that the language specifically does not have anything about assessment of need in the sense that why did this happen? Doesn't directly address that. It also doesn't directly limit participation. Though, as I said, I believe the intent has always been that you can only use this once.
Well, somebody makes a decision to provide the additional assistance.
Right?
And there's
Absolutely.
no criteria as to the basis for them deciding it, aside from sustainability.
well,
Sustainability is the primary one, but also need, and it's VSHA that has the authority to adopt all the program
They're not.
guidelines.
my guess is we will see it, and
Bleeding hearts.
our hearts are big. My guess is this program is just being created. We'll have an opportunity to review it. Its objective is to keep people in their apartments because it costs the state a lot more when they are evicted and homeless. So we want to try as much as possible to keep people in their
We
apartments.
just want to make sure it isn't abused.
Right. And the
that
last
it's fair,
section,
and it's, the issue, probably more than anything else, Senator Cummings said, is the perception by the people who are working hard and budgeting appropriately and are paying their bills to see someone else who's similarly situated getting it for free. And that's a real public perception issue.
yeah,
I can remember when I was first campaigning, knocking on a door, and this woman was very upset. She was working full-time, her husband was working full-time, and we were sending welfare mothers to college. She would give her right arm to be able to go to college, but she couldn't because they needed her paycheck. And there was a woman on the front page of the Burlington Free Press, and she and her kids sitting in their living room, and her kids all had Nike sneakers on. And this woman couldn't afford Nike sneakers for her kids. That is just the kind of, you know, we can help this group, but there is a group just over the line.
and also we can't make assumptions about how those Nike
No, we
sneakers got.
cannot. They might very well.
It might have been a gift from,
Or come from Goodwill. I mean,
right, but
but that's the kind of trigger that, and you have to be sensitive. There are people that are working very hard and make $10 a month over the line and don't get any help. And so I think that's.
Or you have the situation I ran into at the pharmacy in St. Albans yesterday, in which there's a line coming up, and then there's a fellow who's an employee there, and he's asked, you know, can you stay another hour to help? He said, no, because I'll be over my limit of income.
which is heartbreaking, and we hear that all
You
the time.
said that
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
public?
In public.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's.
So- So I'm cognizant of David's time, and if Damien is coming to join us in a minute to address his sections of the bill. David, you have one last section
This
here.
is the last piece. Katie McLean actually worked on this. It's it was brought in from another House bill that she wrote, but it deals with, so rental target housing. This is rental housing pre-1978 is subject to the lead paint rules and regulations. And this is to basically, allow that an owner who personally performs the work for the lead paint remediation work is not required to be licensed and meet those insurance requirements, which are extremely expensive.
Actually, I've heard from a lot of people supporting this.
I got emails.
Me too. I got email.
So, great,
Right.
thank you. So is there, just to, before Damien gets here, just to finish up on Ann and Randy's concern, is there any report back on this program? Do we get to look at it again, or do we just gonna have to remember to ask for it?
There's no specific, I don't think there's a specific.
Well, right now, it's not even funded.
Or created, so it's gonna be created. I just want us to look, I mean, to both your points, it would,
No problem, that's a purpose, we don't know what's in this bill because we don't know what's funded. So
That's
we're
right.
voting on it.
We really don't until
gonna have
they
a bill
finish
that's passed.
negotiating the
Then we're
budget.
gonna be dependent on
So-
somebody else to tell us what we passed.
so,
So on the VSHA piece, there's not a specific reporting requirement. On the legal aid piece, there is.
there it is, okay, good. So we're just gonna have to flag that to watch for next year and ask VSHA to come and share it with us. However, there are other amendments on the floor, David, that may or may not pass? Or are these all the amendments from all the different committees that are in the calendar?
This is just my stuff. I don't even know what other.
I guess my question is this work represented in those amendments that are on the floor?
No, I mean, I can say no, because I'm looking at, there's an amendment about no permit is required for a retail electric distribution utilities rebuilding of existing electrical distribution lines, which is completely
Oh,
different than what you're talking
That's what we heard from Green Mountain Power.
Yes,
And there are a bunch of issues on that, and I know there are additional amendments on that.
I
so.
see a Bungards et al. And I see a China. So those are the ones that are not coming from
Yeah.
committees that have possession of this bill.
Okay,
Baumgart's is on that email chain about the
yes,
land-based septic, which,
and,
not the one you want to talk about.
and Seth is carrying the water on the floor for the, House Natural Resources and Energy Committee, so. Is Damien joining us?
Damien or Kate, or Ellen.
Okay,
Isn't Ellen the base drafter on all of this?
we're gonna hear her, so, while we have him, so
So my
thank you.
committee is meeting in 25 minutes.
I know, don't worry, I know that. So question for
Charter change.
everybody, so thank you for this
My
is
pleasure.
helpful.
Sure.
Because needless to say, S100 is gonna require us probably to concur, period. It's not gonna have more time than that, I don't think, for us to do more than that. At least that's my impression.
Well, there's always-
Keisha, sorry, let me just see if Keisha, do you have any further thoughts on this? I mean, we're hearing all this to make us understand what's coming at us. But quite honestly, it's going to be a real problem if we do anything other than concur.
Right. That's exactly where I am. I mean, I think similarly to when we sent it over, we felt we had created a very delicate sweater or whatever metaphor, and didn't want it tugged on. And I think they honored that and in many ways and added some of their own pieces. I don't know what's going to happen with the amendments today. I will just flag that something has come up that's timely. I wish it had come up sooner. I actually think the city of Burlington didn't advance it forward because they wanted to focus on their own issues, which is frustrating. But the people were doing the mall project, which is our big hole in the ground, as folks know, in Burlington, got a jurisdictional opinion from Act 250 that a hotel or lodging is not considered commercial for the purposes of the priority housing project. Why, I don't know, but the local district commission said they would not count a hotel or lodging project alongside a high percentage of affordable housing as meeting the standard for the PHP Act 250 exemption. And they want like one word included, which is lodging. So I just want to put that out there now. I don't want to
I thought
touch
the
the
house
bill.
was dealing with that. The house has possession of the bill now. Why isn't the house dealing with that? I thought they were.
I think there was an effort and they were told not to have yet another floor amendment added to the list. So it is unfortunate. I don't see them doing that over there. And if people went rogue and did it, I would hate for it to die as a process issue, because I think the merit is worthy of consideration. But I just want to flag that now. That's the only change I would consider us making, because it's such a huge project for Burlington, and it's already been delayed years at a time, as folks know.
If what you're saying is accurate, that is not being included, then there's another issue with the GMP stuff that has also been flagged by the experts outside. This is the
Right.
issue when we have these things happen so fast
I know.
that we.
So, yeah, I mean, I
all
just
sorts
want to
of-
say if we could keep it extremely tight, to things that have been raised as like, this could have unintended consequences or this was unforeseen. I don't think we want to get too deep into the weeds, but that I just want to flag that's where I am is trying not to touch it, but really knowing that this one word has just come back to us as really critical for one of the kind of main projects we're talking about to build housing in Burlington at this point.
Yeah, can I say, even if it wasn't a big issue in Burlington, it does make sense to me that hotels should be commercial. Maybe
Absolutely.
the concern is that
What are they if they're not commercial?
well, sometimes lodging can be transformed into residential. So what you might want to do is just make sure that there's some sort of requirement that it not be changed.
But when it's
Well-
changed, then they would apply for another permit.
Maybe not. I don't know. I don't know.
Anyway,
But
so we're expecting Damien so we have a heads up on two things. If the house doesn't deal with them, which I thought they were, which is the hole in the ground, the Burlington challenge and the GMP challenge. Those are two I thought the house was going to take care of.
well, the GMP one is it is an amendment that's there. Does
Yeah, but
that
there's
mean
a
taking
further,
care
there's
of
a
it?
further thing that came up with that was identified. There's a further issue that came up. So we are now waiting for Damien, who is just arriving as.
We don't
I
have
speak.
to wait anymore. Sorry.
Sorry, guys.
Damien, it's good to see you again.
Always a pleasure to be on
Third
this
time
committee.
today.
You do have one of the more comfortable seats.
Oh, you mean it's not our company that you really are fond of? It's just the quality of the
seat
chair?
is an added bonus.
The seat is in there, okay.
I was very positive that you wore a tie the correct color today.
Is this the correct color?
Well, look at the two of them.
Oh, very close. I have bees on mine, so, yeah.
Oh,
I should have worn my
Yours
charcoal
baseball?
pinstripe suit
No,
too.
they have, looks like
It's a little
Could've been more
character.
shady.
Yeah, it's a little character.
Yeah,
oh, it's an emoji. Is it a happy emoji?
I think
Let's just say yes.
it's barely happy.
Sun is happy, the emoji is happy.
It's a happy emoji
Sure, he'll
because
be
it knows it
happier
won't
on
be
Friday.
discriminated. So would you
There
be
you are.
kind enough to explain where we are? Acacia and I have tried,
Okay,
and so if you would be kind enough to do that, would be great. I think we've done our first stab at it.
so there are three options right now in the House. The first is just concurring what the Senate passed. The second is concur with proposal of amendment, which would be the first possible amendment is just to send back the technical change that I discussed on of course
disparate
I
impact.
close that document, but yes, on disparate impact, and that really is a technical change. It's something that we overlooked here in the Senate, was brought up in the House. And it's the type of discrimination claim where you have to compare to someone else. And then the third option is on the equal pay provisions to add in discrimination, equal pay discrimination on the basis of gender identity and sexual orientation to the list of 4 that went over from the Senate. And then also make the correction to disparate impact. So those are the 3 limited options that are on the table at this point. So the question is.
So that third change that you just concur or technical amendment or this
Yep,
third
so
change,
first option is concur, second is technical amendment, third is technical with a substantive amendment to equal pay.
and that's here on page 2, I believe, of the
Yep.
thing you've given us.
So the key part of that would be that it would now read,
And can you just say which one, because I don't see it saying equal pay.
yeah, so it's starting on the bottom of page 1, subdivision 7, which goes on to page 2.
Okay.
So it makes it unlawful for any employer
Oh, there's.
to discriminate between employees on the basis of the Senate sent over sex, race, national origin, or against a qualified individual with a disability by paying wages to employees of one sex, race, national origin, or without the same physical or mental condition. And that's where mental condition comes, or an employee who is, by paying wages to an individual of one sex, race, national origin, or is a qualified individual with a disability at a rate less than the rate paid to employees of the other sex or a different race, national origin, or without the physical or mental condition of the qualified individual with a disability. So it is very clear there too that you have to be a qualified individual with a disability for that position. So you can't be claiming a higher pay rate than you're qualified for. And it would add to that just gender identity and sexual orientation. So it would read sex, race, national origin.
Is that, you're under 7, it would just read
Yep.
sex, race,
national origin, sexual orientation, gender identity, or against a qualified individual with a disability. So that's the substantive proposal.
Race, sexual orientation, gender identity.
Yep, so it would not add color.
race, national origin, sexual orientation, or gender identity,
Yes,
right? Or against a qualified individual with a disability.
yes.
So,
So it would not add color, religion, ancestry, place of birth, crime victim status, or age to that list.
Or national origin.
National origin is in the Senate version.
we already included that.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
So after, by paying wages to employees of, and then in the next bit of the sentence, it
Yeah.
would just be of one sex, race, national origin,
Sexual orientation.
Gender identity.
Or gender identity, or against a qualified individual with a disability, or, I'm sorry. Yeah, so it would say, sex, race, national origin, sexual orientation, gender identity, or an employee who is a qualified individual with a disability at a rate less, and then repeating the list with a slight change
right?
for the disability
Does
language.
not include age.
So it would not include age.
We can do that next year.
So
Just-
one of, yeah, each one of these has a discussion.
Mhm.
And there's also question of, do we have evidence of this? So there is support in the House, particularly for sexual orientation and gender identity. The other items were added. The discussion in the committee, when this came up, said, well, why don't we just include everything instead of discussing one at a time? And so then the committee just said, yes, let's include everything. And this is not permitting discrimination. It's just saying that an equal pay claim can be made on these bases. So you can still prove age discrimination, and pay can be part of that, but on its own, paying someone differently, and just tracking that based on age is not going to be unlawful unless you can prove that there's discrimination going on and that it's part of a pattern of discrimination. So in that case, with age discrimination, it could be being passed over for promotion, being encouraged to retire, et cetera.
I will say, I don't have any written documentation, but I did hear from one of the legislators that the AG's office, Julio was in is Julio there now? Is that Julio? Oh.
Julio is right here.
So I don't want to misrepresent this, but I believe there was some testimony about someone who identified as trans who submitted a complaint around compensation to the AG's office. So I'm not saying that's, enough to build a whole file around, but Julio might have more details on if LGBT equal pay kind of stands out from the rest as something to consider.
So I believe that is at the moment the only other thing we'd be asked to consider. Is that correct? So Julio, would you be willing to share with us what you shared with House General on this issue?
Yeah, I mentioned to a member.
Just identify yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry. Julio Thompson, Attorney General's Office, Director of Civil Rights Unit. So I mentioned, I'm not sure if I mentioned it before the entire committee or just before a member or two. Our office previously had a gender identity discrimination case that originally was, I think, an intentional discrimination case. And during the course of our investigation, we discovered the pay equity violation. One of the challenges with equal pay often is that employees may not have transparency the way the state of Vermont or some public employers do. And so that was a case that we were able to resolve ultimately. I think everyone's, the employers and the employees' satisfaction, but it was a little more difficult to do because gender identity wasn't in the equal pay statute. We would have to, if the employer were resistant to that, our option was to go to court and try to convince the court that gender identity and sexual orientation were wrapped up into stereotypes about sex, which is covered by the Equal Pay Act. So that was a case, and our experience with equal pay cases is that the cases we do get, oftentimes we discover them during the course of our investigation when we're just looking at how the employee is treated. The employee doesn't always know. And sometimes the employer doesn't know. And then the right thing for the employer to do, if there isn't a justification, is for them to rectify that. And we often try to help, make that adjustment without, going to court, which I don't think we've gone to court. That's all.
So the House, just to move this along, because we have 10 minutes till finance turns into a pumpkin, and when the House goes on the floor, we need to give a signal to the House that if this were to be included, this language, this additional language we've added national origin, if we included this additional language of sexual orientation and gender identity into the equal pay mix, that would be okay with us. And because at this point, we're going to have to simply concur. So what we're trying to get is to guess on a concurable bill.
So, yeah, I mean, the question is really what is the Senate willing to do at this point? Because if
Right.
the House does anything except concur, it requires rule suspensions the entire way. So, and if the goal is to get the bill across this session, and of course I can't speak for what your goals
That's
are
the
and your
goal.
intents, but if your desire is to get this across this session, then it requires a concurrence, or I mean, a rule suspension the entire way, both in the House and in the Senate. I mean, beyond that, that's the biggest question here. If you're concerned, I mean, there's the policy issue for you, and then there's also the procedural issue, I guess is the best way to put it.
Right.
Because procedurally, it might be getting across the finish line with a 16-14 vote. I don't know what the politics are in the Senate right now, but if your concern is getting it to the finish line, then you may not want to agree to more than is going to get you
We
the
haven't
most
heard,
suspensions. So,
is anybody opposed to this? Do you know where the administration stands on this?
Keisha, have you heard any of that?
No, it was a question that came to mind for me as well, and I just didn't know who we would get a signal from. Would it just be Kendall or somebody? I mean, I think, the Human Rights Commission's okay with it, the AG is, but I don't know about the governor's office.
That's the concern I have with all of this. We haven't taken any testimony.
Right.
We don't really know what if there are issues from any party about any of this, because we haven't had the opportunity to hear them.
And it didn't come up when we had.
No.
Damien, when we started, it seemed, I thought everything was everything. And you said no, that you couldn't discriminate on any of these.
right. So
But you said in wage, that was different.
equal pay claims are a little different than a regular discrimination claim. So unequal pay can always be part of a larger discrimination claim, but an equal pay claim, and Julio's better positioned to explain this than I am, but with an equal pay claim, what you're looking at is, so if you have a person who's in one protected category and a person who is not in that protected category, whether it's, the traditional one is a man and a woman, and one of them is paid more than the other for equal work, equal responsibility, equal seniority, etc. That's a clear equal pay claim. So under the claims you're adding here, what you'd have is, say, race or national origin, where you have a person of one race or national origin or a person with a disability, and they are performing the same job as another person who is of a different race or national origin or doesn't have that disability. And all things being equal, they're paid differently, then you have an equal pay claim. So it's a different inquiry than discrimination, where you may be looking at, is the pay difference the result of them not getting promotions because they've been, they've gotten negative reviews or whatever based on their race or their national origin or et cetera. So you can always include unequal pay, lack of promotions, lack of bonuses in a discrimination claim. But equal pay itself is I'm not sure what the right verbiage for is, but it's a very black and white.
Yeah, I just don't like you. I think whatever. I don't like how you present yourself. Whatever. And I can make your life miserable. That could be discrimination. But if I pay you the same as the guy I love next door, then we don't have a wage issue. It's the wages. I might pay people of the same sexual orientation differently doing the same job. That's wage discrimination. I don't know.
Right, you can have equal pay claims when there's no discrimination.
Discrimination,
So you can have something where, as a result of institutionalized, maybe something that happened years ago,
Mhm.
people have been moving at different levels.
Yeah.
It's the fact that they're being paid differently. So, like I mentioned this morning, a few years back, the legislature did a review of pay.
Right.
And they realized that in a couple of cases, there were individuals working in the legislature where same experience, same job, same responsibilities, and there was a pay gap of $1,000 or $2,000 a year between individuals. And it resulted in, it wasn't a case of intentional pay discrimination where they were saying, I'm going to pay these employees less because of that characteristic. In that case, it happened to be that people got raises in different years, and the budget being what it is,
Right.
there was more money available in some years than others. But because you were talking about men and women, it was an equal pay issue. And so everyone got trued up to the higher wage to correct the issue.
And that gets back to the issue I had of the university, higher education institution that was hiring new hires at a higher rate than the people that were there, because that's the only way they could hire them was in this job market. And yet, if they had to immediately bring everybody up to this wage, it would probably bankrupt them.
So there are exceptions for bona fide business reasons, including when you have a tight job market and you have to bring someone on.
But you're gonna have to eventually do that, or your old timers are gonna leave and become new timers, but
Right.
pay somewhere else.
So
Yeah.
I'm just cognizant, I don't mean to interrupt, but I know you have to chair. Julio, I think, wanted to add something, and Keisha was going to say something, so.
Well, and if
I think we
before Julio speaks, maybe he could address this as well. As I understand it, also the definition of sex when it comes to the Federal Equal Pay Act includes sexual orientation and gender identity already. So there's precedent for us to align with the federal definition as well, where their idea of sex is not just, male, female gender, but sexual identity and gender identity, sexual orientation. So I don't know if Julio could address that as well. And that's probably the last word we'll have before we have to decide.
Well, again, Julio Thompson, Attorney General's office. I think that has been the enforcement position of the EEOC since at least 2016 that I'm aware of. In addition, and it may be relevant in terms of how federal law treats it, a couple of years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court, interpreting Title VII, which is not the Equal Pay Act, but whether Title VII, which prohibits sex discrimination, applies to claims brought by members of the LGBTQ community. And the court there ruled, I think it was a 6-3 decision authored by Justice Gorsuch, that it did. The idea was that someone, as Justice Gorsuch put it, the idea of discriminating against someone because they're transgender, it is a shorthand way of saying you don't conform to my stereotype of how a biological male or a biological female should have. So the court ruled that not, just using the plain language of the statute, the court had previously recognized, since going back in the 90s, Justice O'Connor wrote a decision saying that a woman who didn't get or was passed over for partner at an accounting firm because she was too, quote, masculine. The court said that's obviously a gender stereotype. So drawing upon that 1990s era case, Justice Gorsuch said the same is true here. Or with sexual orientation, the underlying idea is that you aren't behaving the way I think a man should behave. A man should be with women, or a woman should be with a man. So that's in the Title VII context. The U.S. Supreme Court hasn't addressed it in terms of the Equal Pay Act, but it's the same. It's a different statute. But that's the way the court has entitled, which aligns with what the EEOC has done for many years. I think going back to 2012, perhaps, with respect to Title VII.
So it is covered.
Well,
Not
it's not clear under the Equal Pay Act. So as I mentioned earlier, if we had a gender identity case and the employer wanted to test it, we would have to litigate that and take our chances in court. From our enforcement position, we thought
So from
we
your,
align with what the court most recently said about gender stereotypes.
so from your enforcement point of view, adding this language would help us align with the federal language. It would give you more to hang your case on.
It would make our enforcement work easier, and I think I think it provides a platform for educating employers. Because remember, the moment this bill is signed, even though it doesn't go into effect until July, the effect will be immediate because employers, the Chamber of Commerce will be working with us and
Right.
and the League of Cities to make sure everyone's educated and they'll start preparing.
The
So
question is, anybody raised any issue as to why this should not be done? Any substantive issue that you're aware of?
with the caveat that I can't speak for witnesses and I wasn't in the room all the time, I'm not aware of any opposition
Yeah.
to this at all. The
They,
Commissioner Festivi from DHR didn't speak to equal pay. She said she didn't have much to add to witness testimony about other provisions. She commented on two different portions of the bill. One, the no rehire provision, which she said aligns with current state practice, at least in discrimination cases. And the second was she reflected, she said she didn't have much to add, that she personally wasn't sure how the clarified or lower standard for harassment, hostile work environment claim would work out. She didn't have any comments on equal pay, but I can't recall where in the sequence the amendment came from, whether it was before or after her testimony. So you can't, my memory's just not perfect on that. I haven't
I've
heard
got
an employer object to it.
So you've got half my committee here.
okay, so we have to make a decision on this before finance meets.
The
And
one thing
before-
I may have just heard, because I've been putting out feelers to see if anybody heard from the administration. I believe Susanna was supportive of this as well. I don't know on what authority she was speaking besides her title and office, but
That's different.
Whether or not we have any support from HR, from the administration proper is the real
Yes,
question.
barring a real objection, because I don't want to get this thing beat up.
No.
I don't think we
I'm
would.
fine with it.
Yeah,
I just-
I'm fine with it
Yeah.
too.
It's just the
I am too.
unknown. that
So
nobody
why
else
don't we
observes.
just find that out today?
Find out
we'll find that
whether we
Keisha, let's pursue that, but I would give a green light to the House to go with this language inclusion and do the technical amendment and adding sexual orientation and gender identity to the equal pay work. That's what's on the table right now, right?
So green light for all of that.
Technical amendment and sexual orientation and gender identity, and we will,
But not including all the rest.
not including all the
Not the
rest,
rest.
we'll take testimony on that next
And
year.
then
All right, fine.
the other piece that came with that was just additional language on the privacy.
Yeah, well, it
Which
would
just
follow
says-
all the way through.
Yeah, nothing shall be construed to require or to permit an employer
Right.
to ask these questions, understanding that that doesn't prohibit an employer from asking those questions when they're required to do so under like federal law, which
Right.
would trumps our state law anyway.
So they can ask those questions if the answer is optional.
Yes, the answer is optional.
Yeah, so it's not a prohibition. And it's just saying this statute isn't affirmatively permitting employers to ask those questions. So,
I mean, clearly that's going to be the first question the employer asks, for clarity on.
Maybe.
And so the question would be, and we don't want to keep fooling with this thing forever. Do you say employer may not require, but may ask on an optional basis? But as I say, we don't want to keep fooling with this because every time we do, it has to go back and.
Yeah, and we can't, and it's gonna be a big enough issue for us to do this at the moment. So I would suggest we address any outstanding issues that may arise next year, because clearly we're gonna be being asked to include more of the prohibited classes into this section. Yes?
I mean, wait to see if the bill gets introduced, but I would not be surprised at this point. So I just don't know.
But I think, given the parameters we just talked about, I think we're okay. Let's double check with, the administration. And if you want to do that, Randy, or?
I'll do that. yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. I have,
Okay.
we haven't heard, yeah, Keisha?
No, I'm just said that's great because maybe we could say to Tom, barring an objection from the administration, we
We're fine.
have consensus in the committee.
If
Okay,
there is a suggestion, an objection to the administration, we can meet again, whether it be the end of the day or first thing tomorrow for a few
Right.
minutes.
yeah,
Yep.
Okay.
That works.
Yeah.
Thanks so much,
Do it.
everybody. Great.
okay, so Keisha, are you communicating with Tom, or do you want me to? What are we doing?
I'll do that right now. I'll put you on the communication so there's no game of telephone.
They're not on the floor yet.
I will text Tom and copy you.
Okay, and Damien, would you, you're also gonna be doing these amendments.
Yeah, whenever they have me in, which is TBD at this point.
Okay, let's,
So the House floor today is
the House floor,
scheduled
they
to
have
go
not gone
until.
on yet, so I'm
No,
gonna
it's
open.
scheduled to run till later tonight.
Okay, so that's why they're
Wow.
doing, okay, I'll go find Tom and talk about this. You're gonna chat with the administration, so barring administration.
And I will stay tuned to
And you'll
hear
stay-
if there are objections.
So tomorrow morning, we have from 9 to 10 tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning, we're going to address, H452, which we're greenlighting fast. We're gonna need to vote on it, and we'll get updates from you, Damien, on the apprenticeship. You're not apprenticeship. David's good, great. So at 9, we'll
Do you
do,
need to hear from me on 100 at all?
yes, I think we
I
didn't hear from
have
you.
like 3 sections left.
So then at 9:30, if it's okay with you, we will hear from you.
I think so.
And then there was something else, and any other S100 changes that happen on the floor today. Because who knows what will happen on the floor. Great, I'm gonna go and find Tom right now. I think we're done. We'll be here at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Got
All
it.
right, great.